Welcome back. We're taking a closer look at China's success in reducing poverty. Let's get back to our panel. And John Donaldson, I want to continue looking at some of the challenges that the Chinese face. One of the top Chinese officials involved in poverty alleviation is Liu Yongfu. He says that one of the biggest challenges remains health concerns, people who fall into poverty because they are sick. And then you add to that, of course, the spread of infectious diseases, and we've got a big problem. So how much of a challenge is the provision of health care in China as one of the strategies of alleviating poverty?
It's being taken quite seriously. New investments in local healthcare, but it is a major challenge. One of the, even if you establish a sustainable way of people emerging from poverty, as soon as one member of the family becomes seriously ill, that can cast the entire household into poverty. The kinds of challenges that you talked about, the aging population, environmental issues, all of those can be quite important. You add disability and other kinds of issues, really this becomes a major problem. One of the challenges, I think, one of the encouraging signs is that that when Beijing announced the precision or the targeted poverty reduction plan, localities, I'm a student of local government, and localities that I went to took it very, very seriously, looking at literally household to household, what are the different issues that each household is taking. But part of the challenge is that identifying exactly what the problem is, learning how to address it, that ability to learn, that ability to understand varies a great deal by locality. In many places it seems very well planned out, very well thought out. In other places it feels like localities are just kind of scrambling, trying to figure out exactly what is causing the poverty in their areas and exactly how to address it. So I think you are going to see sort of interesting and innovative examples, as well as specific places that may not be doing as well as others.
Prabhu, as you've pointed out, there's been a big focus on agricultural development in China to alleviate poverty. And you've written a lot about the Green Revolution. What impact has the Green Revolution had on alleviating poverty, and what does the Green Revolution bring to a country like China?
Oh, the Green Revolution has had a phenomenal impact on poverty reduction in China. Just remember that in the 70s and in the 80s, the majority of the population were living in rural areas. Majority of the population were poor, smallholder farmers. And majority of the population was food insecure. So what the Green Revolution did was it allowed China and also other parts of Asia, including India, to bring in new technologies of rice and wheat, technologies that could increase overall yields per hectare from 1 ton to 4, 5 tons, etc. And that had this tremendous impact on moving from being food insecure, primarily from a calorie sense, but also allowing farmers to grow enough food that they could sell in the market. And that's how the whole agriculture revolution got kick-started, and that's how the structural transformation that took place in China got kick-started. And with that growth in incomes, the demand for non-agricultural goods, the demand for consumer products, improved health, improved education, all of that came in, and that then pushed the non-agricultural economy forward also. So that was a tremendous change.
Shenggen Fan, if we focus on the Green Revolution in China, food production, food security, growing food, something that Prabhu just mentioned, and that is the challenge posed by climate change. And of course, the management of air and water quality in China. How big are these challenges? Are they being addressed?
Well, the huge challenges, not only in China. Right. I think in Africa and South Asia, they are facing the similar challenges. Water, land, and our air have been polluted. We overuse them. But in the meantime, the climate change will make our food system, our agriculture, even more vulnerable to various shocks, the weather events shocks. One point I wanted to add is the importance of investment, particularly in agriculture research investment. So if you look at the Green Revolution in China and in India, they invested quite a bit in agriculture research. But today, Africa still lacks that capacity, technology capacity, human capacity to bring the innovations to the agriculture sector, to the food sector. But beyond that, investment in rural infrastructure, rural education will also be very critical. So actually, I have done my own studies in many countries, including China, India, Vietnam. So the investment in rural infrastructure, feeder roads, in agriculture research have some of the largest impact on poverty reduction, on hunger reduction, and malnutrition reduction.
Agi Veres, looking at the rest of the world, are there any lessons in these Chinese efforts to alleviate poverty for the rest of the developing world?
Yes, I think there's clearly a lot of interest from other developing countries to learn from China on poverty reduction efforts. Now, I mean, some of it is very easy to translate into other countries' policies when looking at, for example, the policies that China put in place. Others may be a little bit more difficult because China is a very unique country in this sense, given the scale and the scope. And for smaller countries in Africa, for example, it may be a little bit difficult to learn from. But I think what's important is that under China's South-South cooperation efforts, it's to identify really the lessons that are applicable and to help these other developing countries to adapt it and apply it for the local contexts. And there are a lot of efforts going on, for example, under the China-Africa cooperation and also under the Belt and Road Initiative, trying to see how China's experience could contribute to global poverty reduction efforts.
Prabhu, can the Chinese blueprint for alleviating poverty be replicated in a country like India?
India has followed a very similar process as China has in terms of the Green Revolution and addressing agriculture productivity improvement through bringing in new technologies for rice and wheat, etc. So if you look at India today, India is self-sufficient in food, much as China is self-sufficient in food. The big difference we have between India and China is, although India has brought down poverty significantly from the time of the 1970s to today, you still have around 15% of the population that are very poor and hungry. But the difference is that much of that population is concentrated in the central and eastern parts of the country which are agriculturally poorer, less fertile, more marginal production conditions, etc. And what India needs to do now is to bring the Green Revolution to these areas, to invest in research and development, infrastructure improvement, etc., bringing in technologies that are tolerant to drought conditions, to flooding conditions, etc. So that's a big part of the change that India needs to make. And also the second difference between India and China that I see is India did not go as much into bringing in investments into labor-intensive job creation that China did. So absorbing populations out of rural areas into non-agricultural employment has been much slower in India. And so that's a lesson that India could definitely learn from China. And the third important lesson, I think, is investment in public health infrastructure. China has done tremendously in rural public health infrastructure, delivery of clean drinking water systems, sanitation, and overall public health investments. And that's an area where India could learn a lot from China as we look ahead.
John Donaldson, what about the issue of urbanization in China? What kind of challenges does that pose for poverty alleviation? With so many people moving to cities, are cities going to be able to absorb that huge inflow of people?
It's going to be a real challenge. I think one of the lessons that China has really shown us is that poverty alleviation is best done when it's done where you have urbanization, where you are developing, as some of my panelists said, labor-intensive manufacturing that people without much formal education can participate. China, as it develops, is aiming to shift from labor-intensive manufacturing to capital-intensive manufacturing, which it really needs to do in terms of its technological upgrading. But the question becomes, what happens to the people, most of whom were formerly rural residents, who depend upon those labor-intensive jobs as a livelihood? How are they going to shift up in that way? At the same time, in the rural areas, you're also under stress with decreasing land. As urbanization increases, it often comes at the cost of arable farmland. And then you add the other factor, which I think is going to be a major one facing all countries, is climate change and the pressure that that will create in terms of the increasing stress upon agricultural land, as well as the increasing demand for natural resources in urban areas.
Shenggen, what do you see as the main challenges? I mean, is China going to meet this goal in 2 years?
Well, in terms of the income, I think, yes, not necessarily 0%, but it will be very close. But right now, even based on the World Bank, $1.90 per day standard, China today probably has about 25 million poor people. So absolutely zero, not possible, right? But close to zero, I think for China, it is possible. But the biggest challenge is other dimensions of poverty. So the safety net or social protection, more targeted social safety net to cover these people who will not be able to join the economic growth or enjoy the economic growth is the way to go. So more targeted approach, going beyond income will be the way to go.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CGTN America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter @CGTN America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.